Any mention of the 1980s in an agriculture community brings instant emotional responses. Anger, regret, head shaking, all the signs of disappointment. 40 years later, we are in the pit of a crisis of another sort. Around the world, agriculturalists are taking their own lives due to the stress their jobs require of them. In the 1980s, American agriculture experienced the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Market prices crashed, loans were called in, and interest rates doubled overnight. Many farmers were forced to liquidate their operations and were evicted from their land. Fights broke out at grain elevators, shootings occurred in local banks, and the suicide rate soared. Farmers' livelihoods were turned upside down, and this began the crisis from which the agriculture industry never recovered. With a profitable future nowhere in sight, farmers were forced to sell everything they had. This included their childhood homes, fields their great-grandparents had farmed, and equipment they could trace back just as far. Their entire lives had been spent preparing to one day run the farm, so there was no backup plan. They were entrusted with the responsibility of keeping the farm running and supporting their families. Some farmers felt the only option for their families to survive the downfall was to take their own lives. Imagine being so broken, so lost, you feel the world would be better without you. Many have felt this way over the years, but recently this epidemic has become even worse. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, male farmers in 17 states took their lives at a rate 2 times higher than the general population in 2012 and 1.5 times higher in 2015. However, author Debbie Wingarton and others say these results may be an understatement because the report skipped over several major agriculture states, including Iowa. Growing up in an agriculture community, suicide is sadly common in my area. 2 years ago, a boy my age committed suicide in a town nearby. We'd grown up showing cattle against each other. The loss impacted his family and many others in the community. Only months later, his dad also committed suicide, leaving behind a wife and another son. There was an empty stall at our county fair that year, and a new award was placed in his memory. It is unknown whether or not the cause of this action was agriculture related, but that does not change a thing. He grew up in an agriculture community just like me. There is an obvious need to have more help readily available in our rural communities. Mike Rosman, an Iowa farmer, is a psychologist and one of the nation's leading farmer behavioral health experts. He suggests the farmer suicide rate may be higher due to an unknown number of farmers disguising their suicides as farm accidents. While the CDC's results can be disputed, our personal experiences cannot. In 2018, Wingarton reported the U.S. farmer suicide crisis echoes a much larger farmer suicide dilemma happening globally. An Australian farmer dies by suicide every 4 days. In the UK, 1 farmer a week takes his or her own life. In France, 1 farmer dies by suicide every 2 days. In India, more than 270,000 farmers have died by suicide since 1995. This suicide problem does not root itself in the United States alone. It spans the globe, threatening all those within the agriculture industry. When times get tough, sometimes the pressure is too much. The question is then asked, why don't you just sell the farm? Think about it. Why can't the owner just sell the farm? The farm that can be traced through generations of their family, the fields their great-great-grandparents farmed, the very tractor where their dad taught them to drive. Why can't they just sell the farm? Not only would the farmer be giving up his job and livelihood, but he would be giving up the memories and legacy his family had built before him. He would be disappointing himself, his friends, and the family members who had entrusted him with their legacy. If my dad were to tell my brothers and me he was having thoughts of suicide, our first thought would not be to sell the farm. Like many farmers, I can see the joy our cattle bring my father. As he stands at the opening of the show ring with his arms crossed and a rope halter in hand, I know this is what he loves. Now, don't get me wrong, many things could be improved, but for where we are at, he loves it. Selling our cattle and giving up the lot, pasture, and barn would certainly give us more money, but money simply isn't happiness. Just like on most farms, my father has been the driving force of this operation for the last 8 years. Selling out is simply not an option for us, as well as many others. Dr. Rosman may have discovered the beginning of understanding this issue. He suggests the agrarian imperative theory. This theory speculates the people involved in farming have a strong urge to supply the essentials needed for human life to others. They are willing to go the extra mile to supply these needs. When they are unable to complete their purpose, they feel despair. Within this theory then lies the paradox. The drive that makes a farmer successful is the same that exacerbates failure, sometimes to the point of suicide. Their drive to fulfill their passion to feed the world then leaves them with discomfort and disappointment when they are unable to achieve their purpose. Through a survey I created, I received global responses about mental health in the agriculture industry. The results took my breath away. 88% of responders knew at least one person who had committed suicide. Of that 88%, 57% were involved in the agriculture industry. According to these results, more than half of the suicides our population has faced is within one industry, our industry. So what are we going to do about it? Within the results of my survey, a staggering amount of people stated, erase the stigma. Farmers are thought to be as tough as nails. This stigma has made those in the agriculture industry feel like they have to be strong and cannot express these daunting feelings. They feel they cannot seek help because they will be less of a person for reaching out. Holly Spangler, a journalist for Farm Progress, has written many articles on mental health and how important it is in the agriculture industry. Through Spangler's research, she spent many hours talking with Ted Matthews, a director of rural mental health in Minnesota. Ted says the best thing you can do for a farmer who's hurting and feeling desperate is to be aware. Pay attention and help them get help. Make it a why not rather than a why. When will it be that your neighbor that takes their life due to the challenges within the industry? When will it be your brother, sister, father? When will it be you? Change starts with each of us. Call those you have not spoken to in a while. If the weather is bad, call a farmer to see how they are doing. Start changing the world with you and your actions. Educate yourself on learning the signs of those struggling with a mental illness. Teach yourself and others how to talk with those who are struggling. Be the change we want to see. Alter your attention from focusing on how we are feeding the planet to how we are fueling the minds of agriculturalists. Thank you.